It's World Eaters this week. Games Workshop has revealed a few important new details as to the Blood Tithe, so let's talk about this powerful new army boost and which abilities I think are best in game. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking World Eaters once more, and as Games Workshop's just published a new preview for the World Eaters Brutal Blood Tithe, I thought we'd do a bit of a review of the mechanic and talk about which of the abilities are looking best to be using in the World Eaters army. After you've wet the battlefield with the blood of the fallen, which are the top abilities to make your World Eaters angrier? First up, for the Games Workshop preview, they've told us a couple of new things, though the vast majority of the Blood Tithe mechanics we knew already. Blood Tithe is the new World Eaters special rule, the one that you get if your entire army is World Eaters and you just have agents of the Imperium or unaligned units as allies, and the general thrust is that you kill things and have your units destroyed, and then you get to unlock some army-wide buffs, spending Blood Tithe points for them. We'll talk through the entire rule in just a second, but the two extra bits that they've confirmed in today's preview, besides stuff that we already knew, were another Blood Tithe ability called Total Carnage. This one is 1/4/6s to hit, also wounding in melee, and to be honest I'm not sure it's the most exciting out of them. We'll talk about how it stacks up against the other damage dealing ones in just a second. This one again fits perfectly with the rumours. Now we actually have the number of points that you need to unlock it though, which is 6. It's one of the most expensive. Otherwise, the other interesting thing that they did was confirm the rules for spending the points. It sounds like every phase you're allowed to purchase one Blood Tithe ability, spending the points, and then you get the buff the entire game long. And as per the Warhammer Plus battle report, it does appear that you can purchase abilities in the enemy turn, say for example flexing into the anti-psyker one just before you're hit by a barrage of mortal wounds. Putting that knowledge into the bits that they've already confirmed, here's the Blood Tithe mechanic as we know it so far. I feel like it's really quite a fun and fluffy special rule for the World Eaters, basically infusing them with the power of Khorne in a few different ways, and most notably it's generated by kills, but Khorne cares not from where the blood flows, so the kills for your own models count as well. You score the Blood Tithe point in 3 different ways. The most easy way is that each time a unit dies, whether it's friend or foe, you get a Blood Tithe point. That's where the majority are going to be coming from. And then there's a couple of options for gaining bonus points. You can get 1 per phase if at least one character, monster or vehicle has died, and another 1 per phase if at least one Titanic unit was killed. You can get both of those for the same unit, but even say if you killed a whole ton of vehicles in a phase, you'd still only get the 1 bonus one, plus that 1 standard one that you get per unit. Then we've got the Blood Tithe abilities. This is the roster as we know it so far. A 5+ save against mortal wounds, a +1 to your charge rolls, a 6+ feel no pain, extra AP by -1 in melee, 60 to hit giving you an extra hit in melee. That new 6s in melee auto wound the enemy, and for 6 Blood Tithe points it's Resurrect Angron. He comes on from normal Warp Strike in your reinforcement phase with 8 wounds remaining, and he can do that multiple times if he keeps on getting killed. Pretty scary stuff, the last one. The only unconfirmed one from the leak so far is a +1 to hit in melee. We don't know how many Blood Tithe points that's going to be yet though. I wouldn't be too surprised if it was 5 though, it seems fairly equivalent for the exploding 6s. Overall fun and fluffy, and it looks like you could certainly adapt it to the army that you're playing, say taking some choices against some foes and some against others. In general, it does look like there's going to be a few different ways that you could potentially game or maximise the mechanic, and it's going to be much stronger in certain games than others. First up, I would say that it's probably going to make the World Eaters just a bit of a snowball in terms of an army. If you manage to get a bunch of kills early, then it means that you're going to get more buffs towards your damage and things. That means that you're likely going to get more kills, and then probably trigger even more Blood Tithe points as a result. If you manage to get the ball rolling early in the game, it's likely going to be a big advantage, compared with if you're a bit sluggish in getting the first few kills and getting the first abilities off. I would note as well that it looks like it's going to be far stronger in bigger games compared with smaller games. In say a big 2,000 or 3,000 point battle for example, you're going to have a whole ton of units to score the Blood Tithe points on, but then you're going to be spending them on the same abilities that impact your army-wide. It means that in an enormous game you might just have a couple of units of scouts killing each other, and then that triggers some powerful army-wide rules for the rest of your World Eaters army. Compared with say if you were playing a combat patrol game, that would mean that you'd be getting very few Blood Tithe points on the board, and it means that you just wouldn't be building up the same amount of stacked army-wide buffs across the game. You might only get say 1 or 2 of the Blood Tithe abilities on the go, compared with say a 2,000 point game where maybe you get 5 or 6 by the game's end. It is going to make World Eaters just that bit better at large games compared with small. The one exception to that though is the Angron ability, which we'll get onto. Otherwise, it does seem kind of notable that you're going to be incentivized to take multiple small units to farm points for the Blood Tithe. It means that a World Eaters list is going to be racking up points far quicker if, say, you're taking a whole bunch of small units, as opposed to just 1 or 2 enormous blocks of Terminators, for example. Based on the leaks points page for the codex, it looks like a trio of individual spawn for 75 points looks absolutely great. You can fill them just in one model units for 25 points. They're pretty nice to have on the board just in general as little nuisance units that can jump onto objectives and potentially even bully enemy light infantry. But in World Eaters you get the extra bonus that if they die they'll generate a Blood Tithe point, meaning that you could get them all killed early in the game and get some army-wide buffs rolling quickly. Feels like a unit that your opponent just really can't win on. If they live, they might kill things, hold some points, or just generally be annoying. If they die, they unlock your army-wide boosts. Obviously, that is presuming that they don't have some sort of datasheet rule, meaning that they don't count as much for the Blood Tithe. Definitely not impossible given how cheap they are. I guess we'll wait and see on that front. In any case though, again going by the leaks points list, there are a whole bunch of other units that are pretty small and cheap in terms of points value. Nothing on the same level as Spawn, but plenty of stuff that's really not that expensive. Perhaps one of the most obvious ones would just be 5 Khorne Berserkers at 110 points. In Arcs of Omen detachments, you could absolutely spam those if you want to, guilt-free. Each unit that makes its mark on the enemy is going to hit them very, very hard, and if they die then they're generating Blood Tithe points. By the time the enemy's cleared a significant amount of them, you're going to have a fair few on the go. Otherwise, 10 Jackals are pretty efficient at just 70 points. A Rhino for your Khorne Berserkers is great at 80 points, plus that accounts for the destroyed vehicle one. If you want to be trying to trigger that in the enemy turn, I feel like 5-man units of Berserkers in Rhinos is going to mass those Blood Tithe points very, very quickly, as well as just being fairly efficient as a combat unit in general. The Master of Executions with the Blood Tithe mechanic seems like pretty much an auto-include to fill up any spare HQ slots. 65 points for a character that's really solid in melee, never mind the Khorne buffs, a lurking threat in your ranks, and when he's killed he'll also trigger the destroyed character one, again for an extra Blood Tithe point potentially. Otherwise, just for units on the smaller size, the Hellbrute's only 105 points, and a regular squad of 8 bound would just be 120. Not sure quite how popular Hellbrute's going to be, but racking up more points might give him a bit more advantage over things like Forge Fiends or Defilers. An 8 band looks scary enough on their own, again a few multiple small units might not be the worst thing. In general, I feel like the mechanic's going to reward some multiple small units in the front ranks of your army to die early. Hopefully that could get the snowball rolling, and you're going to have more points and opportunity to do that in bigger games compared with small. Going through the Blood Tithe abilities individually, we've got basically 4 utility abilities and then 4 damage abilities. I feel like the utility ones are all ones that you would want to get going with fairly early, though perhaps the cheapest of them, the 2 Blood Tithe point ones for a 5+ save against mortal wounds. That's really quite a nice one that you can flex into matchup dependent. If your enemy doesn't really have all that many mortal wounds, then obviously it's not going to be worth it. But if you're playing an army that spams them out big in some way, particularly things like Grey Knights or Thousand Sons, this one is basically auto-include good and probably about as soon as possible. If you do get one of those matchups, it's probably about the single most efficient Blood Tithe ability that you could possibly buy in. For the 3 Blood Tithe point one giving you a +1 to charge, I feel like this one is kind of interesting. Maybe one that perhaps doesn't feel quite as exciting, but one that you probably should buy in early as well if you can. A +1 inch charge really is only quite a small boost towards melee. A lot of the time it's just going to be completely meaningless. You might just make the charge anyway or make it with a CP reroll, but if it ever does make the difference between a successful charge and a failed one, then it's going to be an absolutely enormous deal, and it will be directly to thank for an enormous amount of damage against the opponent with how hard the World Eater's units hit. I feel like it might be one of those slightly annoying ones where ideally you'd want to get it in early, but at the same time you'd have to weigh it up against the actual damage increases, depending on how easily you think you're going to make the charges. I feel like the thing that it's going to be most relevant for, though, is if you've got anything coming out of Warp Strike, say some Terminators perhaps, and particularly if you've got Angron on the go and you're thinking that you're going to be respawning him later in the game, making his charge go down from a 9 inches to an 8 inches really is quite a big deal. It means that with a command point reroll on that charge, you'd be having a 66% chance to get him in after he returns to the fray, and a fair bit less chance of having to spend that command point to reroll it in the first place. Otherwise, for 4 Blood Tithe points, we've got the 6+ Feel No Pain. I think this is going to be a fairly relevant one for the World Eaters. Often I feel like their melee damage is going to be adequate when they make combat. It's going to be more of a case whether or not they can survive to get there. In theory, a 6+ Feel No Pain type save, if you're being shot by damage 1 weapons, would usually equate to around a 20% durability improvement. It works out as 20% due to the chance of passing saves on saves that you've already passed. In reality though, it can be a bit more messy than that. Say for example, if you had a whole bunch of 2 wound Khorne Berserkers and the enemy had a whole bunch of flat damage 3 weapons, that Feel No Pain actually isn't going to be that effective. But on the flip side, say if you had a whole bunch of 2 wound corn berserkers and then the enemy's got absolutely loads of damage 2 weapons, the save is actually more effective because basically you save a berserker's life if you even pass one of the 2 dice on the feel no pain roll. In general, I'd say again this is a pretty nice to have one and fairly early if possible, but it is going to be more or less relevant in certain matchups depending on whether or not the opponent has those perfect damage profiles that just go into the units that you have, and it will be less relevant if the damage that they're throwing at you tends to be a lot higher in terms of damage profile, say d3 plus 3 damage or damage d6. Finally, for the big scary one, the 6 Blood Tithe points one for Resurrecting Angron is pretty massive. Realistically, you will be weighing this up against whole army buffs, so bear in mind what you're giving up each time you summon the Lord of the World Eaters back to battle. But for the sheer amount of combat potential and the extra wounds the opponent has to chew through to remove them from the board each time, it does seem very, very worth it. And bear in mind as well that each time Angron dies, you will be generating 2 Blood Tithe points normally, one for the unit and one for being a character. So I guess in some ways you could see it as usually only costing 4 Blood Tithe points to bring him back rather than 6. It's very spooky and intimidating. It means that you could just throw Angron straight at the enemy, try and rack up some Blood Tithe points early, and then not feel too bad about it if he just gets focused down by the entire enemy and dies. Hopefully he'll have drawn enough fire to keep a lot of your other units safe, and then just return to battle a turn or 2 later, and even getting a free bit of repositioning into the bargain. He could make quite reliable charges out of Deep Strike as well if you already have that +1 to charge ability. But to be honest, even for just forcing the enemy to chew through his massive profile once again, that's going to cause them to do a lot more heavy weapon work and give them an awkward choice between facing his massive melee profile or shooting down a monster that's only going to be respawning next turn if you can rustle up a few more points. And also bear in mind that this one is much more high value in smaller games as well. It could be downright oppressive. Most of the other army-wide Blood Tithe abilities are going to have relatively less effect when applied to a smaller army, whereas kind of the opposite's true here. The opponent might only just about be able to deal with Angron the first time, if that, and then if he pops up and makes combat with another unit and destroys it, that could be absolutely game deciding. I feel like if you did just want to annihilate your opponents at something like an 1,000-point game, Angron plus a bunch of things to generate Blood Tithe points is going to be absolutely monstrous. Otherwise, besides the utility abilities, you've got the 4 different damage abilities, extra AP, 6s to hit explode, 6s to hit auto wound, and a +1 to hit. I feel like when weighing them up against the utility abilities, it might matter a bit whether or not you think you're actually going to struggle to kill your targets in close combat. I feel like with World Eaters, against some armies at least, you might be getting into the realm of overkill, where you may as well just have spent the points on extra chance of making the charge or extra survivability, as when they get there, they're pretty likely to be pulverizing the enemy unit anyway. In any case, to weigh them up, the extra AP -1 I feel is just a little bit on the niche side. It's going to be good against some armies where they have high saves and not particularly high invulns, and particularly better for some World Eaters armies than others, particularly the World Eaters Corn Berserkers with their AP -2. It's generally going to be most relevant on them, I think. With AP -2 attacks going into a 3+ save unit like Space Marines, you'd expect around about a 25% damage increase, not bad at all. But for all the units that are AP -3, as say the 8-bound and the Terminators are, it's just a lot less impressive. You're going to get just less raw damage output even if it matters, and a lot more chance of either just completely having negated their saves already or running into invul saves. Overall pretty good if you're playing say Space Marines or Sisters of Battle with a whole bunch of Corn Berserkers, less good if you've got more of the other units on the go and you're playing things with either bad saves or good invuls. Next up, for 5 Blood Tithe points, there's the 6s to hit Explode in melee. This one's a solid all-round damage boost. Usually that's going to be a +25% boost to your damage output, or even better on Terminators that hit on 4s, where it'd work out to be a 33% boost. A little bit less effective on things that hit on a 2+, that'll give you a 20% boost to your damage, but whichever way you look at it, it's still a solid amount and very reliable against just about every target. I'd say that out of any of the damage boosts, this is the one that I'd usually go for first. It's almost always going to be worth the extra Blood Tithe points compared with the AP one. Otherwise, for the last two, we've got the one that's 6 Blood Tithe points, 4 6s to hit in melee, auto wound the target, and this one really is another very situational one. You're absolutely going to want it early against some armies, but definitely not so much against others, as it's just going to be far more useful against any armies with high toughness. It's just really not good if you're wounding against enemies with a toughness 5 or below. There's a good chance that you would have been wounding them on those 6s anyway. It only equates to around about a 12% damage boost if you were wounding on 3s. However, if you're playing knights and you happen to be wounding on 5s with Corn Berserkers and things, it equates to an enormous 50% damage buff over what you'd expect with the stat line normally. So if you're playing against knights, then this one's a good one to have on the go pretty early. If the Jackals do get to access the Blood Tithe as well, then this will be quite relevant for them with a whole bunch of low strength attacks. Overall pretty swingy this one. If you're playing against a more standard army with a bunch of infantry, you're almost certainly going to be better with the exploding sixes to hit, but if you are playing against knights or an army that's all toughness 8 monsters of some sort, then this one is going to be the best one you can get. Finally, for the last damage buff, there's the +1 to hit in melee. This one's going to be hard to rate seeing as we don't actually know the Blood Tithe points for it yet, though I'd guess it might be a 5 Blood Tithe point ones as a bit of an alternative or extra to the exploding sixes to hit. Maths wise, it's usually going to be pretty close to the exploding sixes. If you're hitting on 3s, it's usually going to be an extra 25% damage, or on 4s with Power Fist, it'll be an extra 33%, though it wouldn't be relevant at all if you're hitting on 2s already. So for things like characters, it's not going to be quite so good, or Exalted 8-bound either if the rumours are to be believed. In general, if this does wind up being the same cost as the exploding sixes to hit, take the exploding sixes before this, but you could definitely stack both of them, and I'd take this as a second pick. Overall though, I do really like the flexibility of the Blood Tithe points. It looks like it's been well thought through, and it looks like just about every single one of them could be relevant in the right matchup. The Feel No Pain and the +1 to charge seem great if you can get them going early, then try and load up on the damage buffs for when you're actually in combat, and of course whenever you can revive Angron, it seems like that's going to be a pretty efficient use of the points as well. In any case, hope you've enjoyed a bit of discussion around the World Eater's Blood Tithe. Let me know your thoughts on the mechanic down in the comments. What would be your strategy for buying in the points as the game progresses? If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new things just about every day. And if you'd like something else World Eaters to watch, I'll link my full Codex Leaks review down in the video description. Hopefully we'll get some more official confirmations soon. If we do, I'll hopefully have the proper Codex review video coming out towards the end of the week. If you've enjoyed the video and you'd like to help support, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, and you can find that links down in the video description below if you'd like to help keep these videos coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.